Welcome to a journey into one of the darkest mysteries ever whispered about in the Ozarks. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you are watching from and the exact time you are listening to this story. It is always fascinating to see how far and wide these accounts reach. The hills of the Ozarks have always carried secrets, but none as deliberately erased from memory as the fate of the Holloway family. What unfolded in the winter of 1860 in the secluded valleys of southwestern Missouri was so unsettling that it was stripped from county records, newspapers, and local lore as if authorities had wanted it gone forever. Yet some stories refused to stay buried. In December of that year, as the nation braced for civil war, a hunter named Thomas Blackwell stumbled upon the Holloway homestead hidden about 20 miles southwest of Springfield. What he found there would trouble him until his final days. Blackwell swore to the Greene County Sheriff that the property looked frozen in time. The dinner table was still laid out with half-eaten food now spoiled and rotting. Candles had burned themselves to stubs. A rocking chair swayed gently near the hearth, though no one was there. But what unsettled him most was the silence. Birds refused to sing, and the woods around the home seemed void of life, as though nature itself recoiled from the place. The Holloways had come to the Ozarks in 1853 from Virginia, bringing with them more wealth than most settlers. Isaiah Holloway, his wife Martha, and his older brother Jeremiah bought 320 acres of dense woodland and built a 2-story home far from neighbors. They lived in isolation, paying taxes on time and causing no disputes. The closest neighbor, Abigail Turner, remembered Isaiah as polite but distant whenever he came into town for supplies. Martha was never seen, and Jeremiah appeared even less often, his presence leaving townsfolk uneasy. Then, without warning, they vanished. What happened next deepened the mystery. After Blackwell reported his discovery, Sheriff Malcolm Harding assembled a search party of 7 men to investigate. Only 5 returned. Deputies James Collins and Frederick Weber had split off to search an old tobacco barn and never came back. A second expedition of 30 armed men scoured the property and the surrounding woods for 3 days. No trace of the deputies or the Holloways was ever found. Sheriff Harding later wrote that it was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. His official report survives only as a brief mention in private papers donated decades later to the Missouri Historical Society. We scoured every inch of that place, the house, the barns, the well, and even the woods that surrounded it. But nothing explained what had happened to the Holloways or to my deputies. At least that was the official story. Years later, a private letter surfaced that told a very different tale. Wesley Pritchard, one of the search party members, wrote to his sister in St. Louis that beneath the house, they discovered a door hidden behind stacked firewood. It led to a narrow tunnel carved deep into the earth. The sheriff sent 3 men inside. When they emerged, their faces were pale as ash, and they refused to describe what they had seen. That very night, the sheriff ordered the tunnel sealed with heavy stones and demanded every man swear an oath never to speak of it. Pritchard gave no more detail, and weeks later he died suddenly of pneumonia, taking his secret to the grave. Whatever lay in that tunnel must have terrified the authorities, because in January 1861, Judge Hiram Woodson issued one of the most extraordinary orders ever recorded in Greene County. The Holloway homestead was condemned, the buildings burned to the ground, the land declared unfit for habitation. Even more shocking, every county record tied to the Holloway family was to be destroyed or sealed, and no newspaper was allowed to mention their name. The order, surviving only in fragments discovered during courthouse renovations nearly a century later, warned that anyone defying it could face prison. Such extreme measures begged the question, what horror could justify the deliberate erasure of an entire family from public memory? For almost 40 years, the Holloways vanished from official history. Their property left as a scorched wound in the wilderness that locals avoided without ever knowing why. But silence is not the same as forgetting. Their story lived on in whispers, half-remembered tales, and family warnings passed down through generations. In 1898, a folklorist from the newly established Missouri State University, Dr. Eleanor Caldwell, began recording oral histories from elderly residents of the Ozarks. Among her papers is the testimony of Martin Howren, 82 at the time of the interview, who had been a young deputy in 1860. He admitted that although he was left behind to guard the office, he overheard the men when they returned from the Holloway place. They spoke in hushed voices of things not meant for outsiders. Howren remembered that in the weeks leading up to their disappearance, Isaiah Holloway had been coming into town more often, looking more troubled each time. The general store owner, Samuel Wilson, said he was a changed man. His nerves frayed, his eyes hollow with dread. Isaiah Holloway had once carried himself with the polish of a man set apart. But in his final months, he appeared broken. His clothes were rumpled and unwashed. His hands shook so badly he could hardly count out his change. When asked about his family, he looked blank, as if the very word no longer made sense to him. On his last visit to Springfield, just days before the Holloways vanished, he sought out Dr. Thaddeus Montgomery. The physician never revealed what was said, but years later, in a private letter to a colleague, he confessed that in all his years of practice, nothing unsettled him more than the case of IH. The man's symptoms were baffling, Montgomery wrote. But it was not the physical signs that disturbed him. It was the way Isaiah spoke of his brother Jeremiah, with the conviction that he was no longer the same man. The doctor advised him to seek spiritual counsel, convinced the affliction was beyond medicine. That idea of transformation surfaces again in the oral accounts Dr. Eleanor Caldwell collected in the 1890s. Sarah Jenkins recalled her grandmother once being invited to help Martha Holloway preserve the harvest in the autumn of 1859. The home, she said, was handsome, but strange, its rooms feeling skewed, its shadows unnaturally deep. Martha was kind, yet tense, carrying herself like a woman under constant strain. Jeremiah remained upstairs, but his presence was unmistakable. Her grandmother remembered hearing movement above, not the steady rhythm of footsteps, but a dragging, heavy shuffle that went back and forth, back and forth. When she asked about him, Isaiah and Martha fell silent and quickly changed the subject. As she left, she caught sight of a face in an upstairs window. It was Jeremiah, or something that resembled him. His features distorted, his eyes glowing like an animal's in the dusk. That night, she dreamed of being chased through endless rooms in a house larger within than without. And she never spoke of it again until late in life. The dreamlike memory gains weight when compared to a far more tangible artifact. In 1964, during the demolition of an old Springfield apothecary, workers discovered a small leather-bound journal hidden inside a wall. Believed to be Jeremiah Holloway's, the book spans from 1851 to 1860. The early pages are ordinary, filled with notes on weather farm tasks and business dealings. But by late 1858, the writing shifts into something darker. Jeremiah began recording what he called the changes. He described waking to find his limbs lengthened unnaturally, suffering a hunger that no food could ease. Strange diagrams filled the margins, mathematical patterns that have defied explanation. In his final entry, dated November 12, 1860, he wrote, "Isaiah knows. I see it in his eyes when he brings me food. Martha weeps outside the door, but they do not understand. This is no sickness. This is an elevation. The hunger is a gift." Through his journal, Jeremiah wrote of whispers carried from beneath the earth, voices of ancient ones who had lived in the hills long before. He claimed he was preparing to meet them, and that soon the boundary between their world and his would vanish. Was this the rambling of a diseased mind, the effects of some neurological illness, or evidence of something darker? The truth may lie in the history of the land itself. Records from the Missouri State Archives show that the 30 to 40 acres the Holloways purchased had been surveyed as early as 1831. Yet for more than 2 decades, no settler claimed it despite fertile farmland nearby. Folklore preserved by the Ozark Cultural Heritage Center suggests the Osage people shunned the valley, believing it was a place where the veil between worlds grew dangerously thin. A French trapper, Jean-Baptiste Robichaud, who lived among the Osage in the 1820s, described in his journal an elder who called the valley Lulu Ulv Marsh, the place where dreams walk. The elder warned that anyone who slept there risked their dreams taking physical form, and once given flesh, some dreams would never return to sleep. Whether the Holloways knew these legends when they built their homestead is unknown, but what is documented is that their house did not rise easily. The Springfield Gazette reported in May of 1854 that the original foundation had been abandoned after workers encountered strange geological formations that made the ground unstable. More disturbing still is a letter from foreman Silas Thornton to his employer in St. Louis, explaining why he quit the project. He wrote that the site presented challenges beyond his skill, that the men complained of restless nights and noises under the ground, and that 3 laborers swore they had seen something moving in the cellar shadows. Thornton admitted he himself had seen nothing, but could not ignore the fear eroding the crew. He urged that another foreman take over, but none did. Instead, Isaiah Holloway and his brother Jeremiah finished the construction themselves. Their decision fueled local gossip, but townsfolk chalked it up to the Holloways' odd, withdrawn nature. For several years they lived quietly enough. Isaiah made regular trips to Springfield for supplies, Jeremiah sometimes in tow. Martha Holloway was seldom seen, though she corresponded with charitable societies in both Springfield and St. Louis. A letter from Martha to the Ladies' Aid Society, dated April 1857, preserved in their archives, offers a rare glimpse into her world. She wrote that while isolation weighed on her, Isaiah promised that once road improvements were complete, they would entertain neighbors more often. She mentioned Jeremiah's growing fascination with the property's rock formations in the western woods, where he spent long hours sketching and measuring. Jeremiah once spoke of writing a monograph on the geological oddities of the Ozarks, though Martha admitted his enthusiasms often burned hot and then faded just as quickly. Her letter painted the picture of a family living a quiet, if solitary, life. Yet other evidence suggests that beneath this veneer of normality, something far stranger was unfolding. In a Smithsonian Archaeological Survey stumbled upon a remarkable discovery less than a mile from where the Holloway homestead had once stood. Beneath a rock overhang, they found a network of caves showing signs of ancient Osage use, but also more recent human activity. Among the artifacts recovered was a pocket watch engraved with the initials J.H. Inside water had damaged a small photograph, but the image was still clear enough to identify 3 figures. A bearded man, a woman in a high-collared dress, and behind them, a taller, shadowy figure, whose face was blurred whether by accident or by intention, no one could say. The official report downplayed what the team uncovered, but Dr. William Parsons' private notes describe far more unsettling details. The cave system extended unusually deep for this region, its passages widened by deliberate excavation. At nearly 200 feet below ground, the team found a circular chamber smoothed into symmetry, its centerpiece a 3-foot stone altar covered in markings that matched no known native or European system. Surrounding it were artifacts that defied explanation. 19th century surgical tools, glass apothecary jars, and several journals filled with coded symbols and diagrams no scholar has since deciphered. The expedition dutifully cataloged these items, but made no link to the Holloways, whose story by then had been so thoroughly erased from history that few even remembered the name. The artifacts were boxed, labeled unknown provenance, and locked away in storage for decades. It was not until 1958 that the Holloway mystery surfaced again, this time by accident. Construction crews cutting a new highway through the Ozarks uncovered human remains buried in a hillside 15 miles from the Holloway property. At first thought to be an indigenous burial examination, revealed instead 2 Caucasian males dead since the mid-19th century. Stranger still, their bones bore marks of deliberate post-mortem alteration. The long bones had been carefully scored, as if tissue had been stripped away. Each skull showed cleanly drilled holes, evidence of trepanning, the ancient practice of cutting into the living skull. The mystery of the remains might have endured unsolved, if not for a single object found among the bones, a corroded brass badge. Careful cleaning revealed it to be a Greene County Deputy's Badge Number 7, issued to Frederick Weber in 1859. That one detail reignited interest in the long-buried case. Historian Lawrence Mitchell, driven by the discovery, began piecing together what fragments of the Holloway story still existed. His search was frustrated at every step by missing records, sealed archives, and the silence of those few who might have known the truth. Yet after years of persistence, he published his findings in 1963. Under the title The Holloway Incident: Institutional Erasure of Historical Trauma in the Ozarks. The book was controversial, dismissed by many academics, but it gathered the scattered evidence into the most complete narrative ever assembled. Mitchell identified the remains as those of the missing deputies. Collins and Weber recovered fragments of Judge Woodson's extraordinary order to erase the Holloways from history, and most importantly, tracked down the testimony of Eliza Montgomery, the 91-year-old daughter of Dr. Thaddeus Montgomery. Eliza revealed that among her father's effects, she had discovered a sealed envelope with instructions that it was not to be opened until 50 years after his death. Inside was a detailed account of Isaiah Holloway's final visit to his office. Dr. Montgomery wrote that Isaiah arrived in a state of collapse, gaunt, pale, trembling, his body failing, but his mind even more tormented. He spoke of his brother Jeremiah's transformation, insisting it defied natural law. Jeremiah had locked himself away upstairs, eating prodigious amounts, yet wasting away. He raved about voices calling to him from beneath the earth. Isaiah confided that he feared for his wife Martha. He had found her one night wandering in her sleep toward Jeremiah's door, with no memory of it afterward. On another occasion, he discovered her in the cellar on her knees, clawing at the dirt with her bare hands. Most chilling of all, Isaiah claimed he had seen Jeremiah outside at night, moving in ways he described as neither human nor animal, as though speaking with something that lurked in the darkness just beyond sight. Dr. Montgomery's assessment was clinical. He believed Isaiah suffered from a form of shared delusion, of folie à deux, worsened by the isolation of the homestead. He advised rest and urged the family to return east to more stable surroundings. But Montgomery admitted he never saw Isaiah again. When the Holloways disappeared, he offered what little information he had to Sheriff Harding. Yet he was not asked to join the search party, and was kept ignorant of its results. Later, when Judge Woodson issued his order to erase the Holloway name from every record and memory, Montgomery understood that something had been found. Something so disturbing it was judged unfit for public knowledge. He kept the secret for the rest of his life. Only in his final years did he set his account to paper, leaving it sealed for future generations, a warning from the grave. What remains unanswered in Dr. Montgomery's account is why Isaiah Holloway, so clearly unsettled by his brother's condition, did not simply flee with his wife. Why stay in a home that had become a prison of fear? The answer may lie in another document uncovered by Lawrence Mitchell. A letter written by Martha Holloway to her sister in Richmond, Virginia, in October of 1860, only weeks before the family vanished. "Dearest Carolyn," Martha began, "I write in haste and with trembling hand. I dare not set down the full truth for fear this letter might be intercepted by Jay before it leaves our property. Know only that our situation is of the utmost gravity. Isaiah speaks of returning east, but I fear it is too late. Jay would never permit it, and his influence over Isaiah deepens by the day. They share a bond of blood that I cannot break. And there is the matter of what lies beneath. What Isaiah and Jay uncovered last spring during their excavations has changed them both. Isaiah whispers of it with a reverence that chills me to the bone. I have made preparations of my own, though I may not live to use them. In the drawer of my writing desk, I have left a full account of all that has happened since we came here. If you do not hear from me by Christmas, contact the authorities in Springfield and direct them to that document. But caution them most severely about what they might find. Your devoted sister, Martha." Mitchell claimed to have discovered this letter among the belongings of Martha's sister Carolyn after her death in 1910. The words suggest far more than simple madness. They hint at something unearthed beneath the Holloway land, something that bent both brothers to its will. Martha's reference to a full account hidden in her desk only deepens the mystery, yet no such manuscript was ever found. The desk itself was likely destroyed when Judge Woodson ordered the homestead burned to its foundations. Mitchell's book, which revealed these details, was dismissed by scholars as sensationalism. The Springfield Historical Society refused to stock it. Within a year, the publisher withdrew the unsold copies, and Mitchell discouraged abandoned academic life for journalism. But the story did not die. In 1967, the mystery returned in horrifying fashion when a forestry survey team stumbled upon a mass grave in a remote stretch of the Ozarks. The pit contained the remains of at least 7 people, their deaths traced back to the mid-19th century. Like the earlier discovery of the deputies, the skeletons bore signs of deliberate post-mortem treatment, bones scored as though tissue had been stripped away, skulls punctured with careful trepanning. Yet this time, there was something more. The bodies had not been tossed carelessly into the earth. They had been arranged in a deliberate pattern, a rough circle with every skull turned toward the center. At that center stood a single stone object, cylindrical in shape, about 8 inches high and 4 inches across, carved with markings, unlike anything known from either Native American or European traditions. Victor Carrington, the anthropologist tasked with the examination, concluded in his report that the arrangement suggested ritual purpose. What that purpose might have been, however, he left unstated. The stone cylinder discovered at the center of the grave was carefully photographed, measured, and sent to the Smithsonian for further study. Yet before it could be examined, it vanished. The official explanation was that it had been misplaced during cataloging, but no record of its transfer or current location has ever surfaced. To this day, the object's whereabouts remain unknown. The individuals buried in the mass grave have never been positively identified. Without dental records or modern DNA testing, only circumstantial evidence connects them to the Holloway story. Still, the location, the mid-19th century time frame, and the deliberate treatment of the remains make it difficult to dismiss the connection. Their careful arrangement suggests ritual, not simple disposal. But ritual for what purpose and to what end? When journalists pressed him for answers after the discovery, Lawrence Mitchell revisited his theory. He proposed that Jeremiah Holloway had uncovered something in the caves beneath the homestead. Something ancient, something malevolent that slowly consumed him. According to Mitchell, Jeremiah's corruption spread first to his family and then to others who crossed their path, culminating in a ritual meant to open a doorway to elsewhere. But beyond vague references to entities and thresholds, Mitchell could not explain further. His conclusions were ridiculed by academics who preferred more earthly explanations: a family unhinged by isolation, a cult engaged in brutal rites, even ergot poisoning from tainted grain, which could trigger hallucinations and madness. And yet, there is one piece of the Holloway puzzle that none of those explanations can address: the deliberate erasure. Judge Woodson's sweeping order to burn the Holloway home, destroy records, and forbid any public mention of the family suggests an institutional effort that went far beyond normal responses to crime or madness. Why expend such energy to make them vanish from memory? An alternative theory emerged 2 years later. In 1965, medical historian Dr. Elizabeth Foster published a study of 19th century medicine in rural America. One chapter dealt with experimental practices carried out far from oversight. Distance from medical authorities, she wrote, combined with the desperate need for treatment in isolated communities, created fertile ground for experimentation beyond ethical limits. She documented cases of physicians performing unauthorized surgeries, testing unproven drugs, and conducting anatomical research without consent. The frontier, she argued, offered both opportunity and concealment. Though Dr. Elizabeth Foster never mentioned the Holloway case directly, and may not have even known of it, her work provided a framework for interpreting Jeremiah Holloway's activities. Could he, with a background in medicine or science, have been carrying out illicit research in the seclusion of the Ozarks? The surgical instruments found deep within the cave system, his journal entries describing transformations, the evidence of methodical post-mortem treatment on human remains. All of it suggests a pattern of systematic experimentation rather than random violence or supernatural delusion. That possibility gained unexpected support in 1968, when an archivist at the University of Pennsylvania uncovered a student record from 1841 to 1845 for one Jeremiah Holloway of Richmond, Virginia. The record described him as a brilliant medical student with a fascination for comparative anatomy and the then nascent field of evolutionary biology. His dissertation, now lost, bore the unsettling title on physiological adaptation and the malleability of human form. Surviving notes from his advisor, Dr. William Patterson, praised his intellect, but warned of the extreme nature of his theoretical propositions and hinted at suspicions that Holloway may have conducted unauthorized experiments. Despite these misgivings, Jeremiah was awarded his medical degree. He established a practice in Richmond before relocating west with his brother and sister-in-law. If true, this explains much why the Holloways chose such a remote location, why Jeremiah oversaw excavations beneath their home, why Isaiah grew increasingly distraught at what he witnessed, and why local authorities resorted to an extraordinary campaign of erasure once the truth began to emerge. Yet even this rational theory fails to address certain elements, the references in Jeremiah's journals to old ones dwelling in the hills, and the stone cylinder inscribed with unknown markings found at the center of the mass grave. The most chilling revelations came the following year. In 1969, during renovations of a Springfield boarding house, workers pried up the floorboards of room 17 and uncovered a cache of hidden documents. Inside a sealed compartment lay a leather portfolio bearing the seal of Greene County. It contained a complete copy of Judge Woodson's order condemning the Holloway property, Sheriff Harding's full report of the search, and most startling of all, a personal statement written in Woodson's own hand. What was found beneath the Holloway house defies rational explanation, Woodson admitted. The tunnel concealed in the cellar extended far deeper than geology could account for. Members of the search party reported descending for what seemed like hours, though in measured time no more than 30 minutes had passed. They described chambers that shifted before their eyes, rooms that altered in shape as they were observed, and passages that curved back upon themselves while maintaining a straight course. In the deepest chamber stood an altar. Upon it rested a book bound in material none could identify. When Deputy Collins attempted to open it, the chamber filled with a sound like thousands of voices whispering in unison. Collins convulsed violently. Weber rushed forward to help him, only to collapse himself under the same unseen assault. The survivors of the search party fled in terror, dragging Sheriff Harding with them. He had collapsed into a state of shock, unresponsive for 3 full days. When at last he regained his senses, Harding immediately ordered the tunnel sealed and brought his report to Judge Woodson. It was then that Woodson issued his extraordinary order records. Erased property, condemned memory itself stricken from public life. "I do not know what ancient evil the Holloways unearthed," he wrote. "I know only that it lies beyond human comprehension, and that even knowledge of its existence can do harm. I have ordered every trace destroyed, not to conceal the truth, but to protect humanity from it. May God forgive me if I am wrong." Those papers, like so many other fragments of the Holloway case, did not survive. The contractor who discovered them during the Springfield renovation later testified that men claiming to be government historians took possession of the portfolio, leaving a receipt that turned out to be fraudulent. No trace of the documents has ever surfaced in any official archive. What then are we to make of Woodson's account? Impossible architecture. A book bound in unidentifiable material. A sound like thousands of voices whispering at once. Were these the delusions of frightened men? An exaggerated justification for drastic action? Or something far stranger? One detail offers a chilling echo from an entirely different source. In 1932, folklorist Vance Randolph published Ozark Magic and Folklore, a collection of regional superstitions. Among his interviews was one with an elderly woman from Taney County identified only as Mrs. M. She told Randolph her grandfather had been part of a hunting party in the 1860s that stumbled into what he called a door to the underworld in a remote valley. He described descending into a cave that plunged far deeper than it should have, where the rooms shifted shape if you looked away, and where the sound of countless voices whispered in the dark. Randolph dismissed the story as rustic fantasy, a folk tale inspired by dime novels of the era. What he could not have known was how closely it mirrored Judge Woodson's suppressed account. Could both testimonies, one recorded in secret, the other passed down in folklore, be describing the same phenomenon? If so, what was it? A natural formation distorted by fear and superstition. An elaborate hoax staged by the Holloways for purposes unknown. Or something genuinely anomalous, a feature of the land itself that defies human understanding. The Ozarks are riddled with caves carved over millions of years from soluble limestone. Some plunge hundreds of feet below the surface into vast cathedral-like chambers. Within those spaces, sound bends and echoes in unnatural ways, creating auditory illusions that can overwhelm the senses. Such natural explanations might account for part of what was reported, but they cannot explain everything. Certain limestone formations in the Ozarks are known to trap naturally occurring gases such as carbon dioxide and, in rarer cases, hydrogen sulfide. In confined spaces, these gases can build up to levels that induce confusion, hallucinations, even unconsciousness and death. Could it be that the Holloway homestead sat atop such a formation, and that Jeremiah, with his scientific training and curiosity, deliberately tapped into it as part of his experiments? This theory explains much the Holloways' altered behavior. The reports of voices and visions, even the extreme response of officials who may have recognized the threat of mass poisoning. But it cannot explain everything. The carefully arranged bodies in the mass grave, the stone cylinder etched with unknown symbols, the methodical post-mortem treatment of human remains, all point to deliberate, purposeful activity rather than accident. Perhaps the truth is a convergence of the natural and the human. A physician with radical theories discovers a geological anomaly beneath his property, a natural source of gases that warp perception and break down the mind. Under their influence, Jeremiah begins experimenting first on himself, then on his family, and perhaps on others. He comes to believe in transformations and voices older than memory. His delusion takes on ritual form, expressed in surgical modifications of the dead. When authorities finally uncover the scope of his activities, they confront not only a public health disaster, but the specter of something far more disturbing. Their response is absolute erase everything. Destroy the home, burn the records, and strike the Holloway name from history itself. And yet, the most unsettling part of the Holloway mystery is not what we know, but what has been deliberately hidden. The thoroughness of the erasure suggests a terror so profound that those who witnessed it believed silence was the only protection. For more than a century, the land where the Holloway home once stood has remained untouched. Locals avoid the valley without ever knowing why. Hikers who wander too close report disorientation, lost time, or the eerie sense of being watched. Rangers quietly discourage exploration, warning of unstable ground and sinkholes. In 1968, a geology graduate student from the University of Missouri attempted to map the cave systems in the area. After 2 days in the field, he staggered back to camp in a state of agitation, packed his equipment, and left without a word. He withdrew from the university the following week and vanished from public life. His field notes abandoned at the site contained one final entry dated June 17, 1968. The graduate student's final note reads like the beginning of a nightmare. He described finding an unusual formation roughly 3 miles southwest of his base camp, a narrow vertical shaft that appeared man-made or at least altered by human hands. Using ropes, he descended 30 feet into the opening. The temperature dropped sharply, at least 15 degrees cooler than the surface. The acoustics were unlike anything he had encountered, his own voice returning to him as a chorus of distorted whispers. He noted concerns about the air quality, feeling lightheaded, and resolved to return the next day with a gas detector and better equipment. There is no record that he ever did. When university officials organized a search based on his field notes, they found no sign of the shaft. The ground in the area showed evidence of recent movement, perhaps a landslide that may have buried the entrance. The Holloway story seems to ripple outward, intersecting with other strange episodes in Ozark history. One of the most curious is the case of the so-called Mad Trapper of Tiny County. In the winter of 1891 into 1892, hunters began finding their game mutilated in grotesque ways. Several men went missing only to reappear weeks later, wandering aimlessly, unable to explain where they had been. Local authorities blamed a reclusive hermit known only as Old Webster, who had lived in the hills for decades. According to contemporary accounts, Webster was eventually cornered in a cave. Rather than surrender, he fled deeper inside. The sheriff's posse, unwilling to follow him into the dark, sealed the entrance with dynamite. Whether this incident connects to the Holloway mystery is uncertain. But a troubling detail emerges in the private papers of Sheriff Elias Barton, who led the posse. In a letter to his brother, Barton confessed, "The business with Webster is concluded, though, in a manner that leaves me deeply troubled. Before we sealed the cave, I observed markings on the walls near the entrance that I have seen only once before on certain papers related to the Holloway incident of '60, I would have investigated further, but the men were eager to be gone from that cursed place. His words suggest that the same symbol found carved into the stone cylinder and described in Woodson's suppressed report surfaced again 30 years later, scrawled on the walls of a cave in Taney County. If Barton's testimony is accurate, it implies continuity, some thread binding the Holloway case to later disturbances in the Ozarks, whether through tradition, imitation, or something more enduring. The mystery gained new life in 1965. When Daniel Crawford, a doctoral student at Columbia University, began combing through Greene County land records for his dissertation on post-Civil War land use. He was puzzled by one parcel in particular, the Holloway property which had remained under county ownership since 1861, with unusually strict prohibitions on development or habitation. Intrigued, Crawford tried to trace the property's history. Instead, he encountered the same wall of silence that had obscured the Holloways for over a century. Daniel Crawford refused to be deterred. When official channels yielded nothing, he turned instead to personal papers, oral histories, and unofficial accounts. Over 2 years, he reconstructed much of the Holloway narrative we know today. His notes, preserved in the special collections of Columbia University Library, reveal a careful researcher working through fragments and contradictions, but also a man slowly consumed by the weight of his subject. In the later pages, his handwriting grows erratic, his words tinged with obsession. The final entry in his journal, dated November 3, 1967, reads like the confession of a hunted man. I am being followed. For weeks I have felt their presence, but today I saw one of them clearly. A man in a dark suit stood outside my building. When our eyes met, he smiled, and I felt cold to the marrow. They know. They know what I have uncovered. The Holloways were only the beginning. The same pattern repeats 1892, 1924, 1953. Always in the Ozarks, always marked by the same signature. I have compiled my evidence in a separate document sent to Professor Harrington. If anything happens to me, that record will ensure the truth cannot be buried again. 3 days later, Crawford was gone. His apartment showed signs of disruption, as though he had left in haste or been searched. No trace of the document he claimed to have sent was ever found. Professor Harrington denied receiving anything. Police dismissed the case as a breakdown, concluding Crawford had taken his own life. But no body was ever recovered, and his family rejected the verdict, insisting he had been stable until his research drew him into the Holloway shadows. Crawford's cryptic references to repeating patterns in 1892, 1924, and 1953 sent later researchers searching for connections. In 1924, the mining town of Orchard Creek, 20 miles east of the Holloway land, was abandoned within a week. Newspapers blamed disputes over mining rights and unstable shafts. But county records reveal something stranger. The land was condemned by court order and placed under indefinite restriction, echoing the Holloway case. Unlike 1860, however, no attempt was made to erase the town from memory, perhaps because officials no longer recalled the earlier precedent. Then, in 1953, a University of Arkansas research team vanished while conducting a botanical survey in a remote Ozark valley. Their camp was found undisturbed with equipment and samples left neatly in place. But the 6 scientists had vanished without a trace. The site was later sealed off under the pretext of environmental sensitivity. Are these incidents connected, as Crawford believed? The geography, the official restrictions, the unexplained vanishings all suggest a pattern. Yet without access to sealed records or fresh excavation, definitive proof remains out of reach. The most tantalizing clue may still be the stone cylinder recovered from the mass grave, its surface carved with symbols unlike any known language. That object, photographed and measured, was sent to the Smithsonian for study before vanishing from their vaults without explanation. Its loss remains one of the most unsettling threads in a mystery woven from silence, suppression, and fear. A strange footnote surfaced in 1968 in the form of a maintenance report from the Smithsonian's secure storage facility. A night watchman claimed he heard sounds like thousands of voices whispering from within the vault. By morning, investigators found him in a catatonic state, clutching a sketch pad filled with the same symbol drawn again and again. The symbol matched no known language, but those who saw it before the sketch pad itself disappeared said it resembled the markings carved into the missing stone cylinder. That same year, comparative linguist Dr. Elizabeth Morrow had already published a provocative paper in the Journal of Historical Linguistics. Her essay, Comparative Analysis of Undeciphered Symbolic Systems in North America, included a rubbing of the stone cylinder's markings passed to her by a colleague at the Smithsonian before the artifact vanished. Morrow observed that while the geometric forms echoed ancient petroglyphs found in Ozark caves, their arrangement bore striking resemblance to European mathematical notation from the 17th century. Particularly the emerging language of calculus and geometric analysis. This strange fusion ancient imagery merged with mathematical structure led Morrow to argue the symbols represented neither a native tradition nor a European borrowing, but a new system designed to bridge the two. Such a system, she suggested, would demand both knowledge of indigenous symbology and advanced mathematical training. An unusual pairing in 19th century America, but not impossible for a physician like Jeremiah Holloway, whose journals reveal both scientific curiosity and unorthodox ambition. What purpose might such a system have served? Morrow proposed that the recursive nested patterns could be attempts to model transformations between states of being, mathematical maps of change itself. In modern terms, she said the markings resembled diagrams meant to describe multi-dimensional transitions. If Jeremiah devised them, it may have been as part of his obsession with transformation, a language he believed could capture the passage between one condition and another, perhaps even between one world and the next. And then there are the echoes, the whispers. The geology student's final notes in 1968 described extraordinary acoustics in a shaft 3 miles southwest of his camp. His own voice coming back to him as distorted whispers, his body weakened by the air. He promised to return with better equipment. He never did. When searchers followed his coordinates, they found no shaft at all, only ground recently shifted, as if the earth itself had closed over what he had discovered. The Holloway story seems to cast a long shadow intersecting with other strange episodes in the Ozarks. One of the most curious is the case of the so-called Mad Trapper of Taney County. In the winter of 1891 into 1892, hunters began reporting their game mutilated in grotesque ways. Several men vanished only to return weeks later, wandering the hills in a daze, unable to explain where they had been. Local authorities blamed the incidents on a reclusive hermit known only as Old Webster, who had lived alone in the hills for decades. According to contemporary reports, Webster was eventually cornered in a cave by a sheriff's posse. Rather than surrender, he retreated deeper inside. The posse, unwilling to follow him into the dark, sealed the entrance with dynamite. Whether this incident connects to the Holloway case is uncertain, but a troubling clue surfaces in the private papers of Sheriff Elias Barton, who led the posse. In a letter to his brother, dated February 1892, Barton wrote, "The business with Webster is concluded, though in a manner that leaves me deeply troubled. Before we sealed the cave, I observed markings on the walls near the entrance that I have seen only once before on certain papers related to the Holloway incident of '60. I would have investigated further had circumstances permitted, but the men were eager to be done with the business and away from that cursed place. I cannot help but wonder if there is some connection between these separate events, separated by 30 years, yet bearing the same strange hallmark. If Barton's observation is taken at face value, the same symbol found carved into the stone cylinder in the Holloway mass grave and in the chambers beneath their house appeared again in connection with another disturbing incident. That suggests continuity, some influence or tradition persisting across decades. The most recent chapter of the Holloway mystery unfolded in 1965, when a doctoral student at Columbia University named Daniel Crawford began investigating Greene County land records for a dissertation on post-Civil War property patterns. His attention was drawn to one parcel in particular, the former Holloway property, which had remained under county ownership since 1861, under strict prohibitions against development or habitation. Intrigued, Crawford tried to learn more about the original owners, only to encounter the same systematic erasure that had hidden their story for over a century. Undeterred, he expanded his search to personal papers, oral histories, and unofficial sources. Over 2 years, he pieced together much of the narrative recounted here. His notes, now housed in Columbia's special collections, reveal a disciplined researcher wrestling with fragments and contradictions, but also a man slipping into obsession. In his final entry, dated November 3, 1967, Crawford wrote, "I am being followed. I have felt their presence for weeks now, but today I saw one of them clearly. A man in a dark suit stood outside my apartment building. When our eyes met, he smiled in a way that chilled my blood. They know what I've discovered. They know I've seen the connections. The Holloways were only the beginning. The same pattern has repeated across decades, 1892, 1924, 1953. Always in the Ozarks, always the same signature. I have compiled all my evidence in a separate document, which I've sent to Professor Harrington for safekeeping. If anything happens to me, that document will ensure the truth cannot be buried again," Daniel Crawford wrote in his final entry. 3 days later, he vanished from his New York apartment. His research materials lay in disarray, as if he had left in a rush or someone had searched for something. No trace of the separate document he mentioned was ever found. Professor Harrington, when questioned, denied receiving any package from Crawford. Authorities concluded he had suffered a mental breakdown brought on by overwork and isolation. His disappearance was officially classified as a probable suicide, though no body was ever recovered. His family rejected that explanation, pointing to his stability before beginning the Holloway research and the suspicious circumstances surrounding his disappearance. Crawford's reference to patterns repeating in 1924 and 1953 drew later researchers to other unsolved Ozark cases. In 1924, the mining town of Orchard Creek, about 20 miles east of the Holloway property, was abandoned in a single week. Newspapers cited disputes over mining rights and concerns about unstable shafts, but offered few details. County records reveal the land was condemned by court order and placed under indefinite restriction, an echo of the Holloway case. Unlike 1860, however, there was no systematic erasure of records, perhaps because institutional memory had faded or new officials were in charge. In 1953, a University of Arkansas research team vanished during a botanical survey in a remote Ozark valley. Their camp was found perfectly intact, equipment samples and personal belongings neatly arranged as though the team had simply walked away. No trace of the 6 researchers was ever discovered. Once again, the area was sealed off, this time under the guise of environmental sensitivity. Were these incidents linked to the Holloway mystery, as Crawford believed? The geography, the vanishings, the official restrictions, they all suggest a pattern. Yet without access to sealed records or the ability to excavate restricted land, no proof can be obtained. The most tantalizing clue remains the stone cylinder recovered from the mass grave, the artifact that disappeared from the Smithsonian's vaults before it could be properly examined. A curious footnote survives from 1968. A maintenance report from the Smithsonian's secure storage facility. A night watchman claimed to hear unusual sounds from inside the restricted area, like thousands of voices whispering at once. By morning, he was found in a catatonic state, clutching a sketch pad filled with the same strange symbol repeated over and over. Witnesses said the symbol resembled the markings on the missing stone cylinder. Before the sketch pad itself disappeared, no one could identify its meaning or origin. When investigators arrived the next morning, they found the watchman in a catatonic state, clutching a sketch pad filled with the same symbol drawn again and again. The design matched no known language or cultural icon. Yet those who saw it before the sketch pad itself vanished, swore it resembled the markings carved into the missing stone cylinder. A year earlier, in 1967, comparative linguist Dr. Elizabeth Morrow had published a paper in the Journal of Historical Linguistics titled Comparative Analysis of Undeciphered Symbolic Systems in North America. Among her examples was a rubbing of the Holloway cylinder's markings passed to her by a Smithsonian colleague before the artifact disappeared. Morrow noted that while the geometric shapes echoed archaic petroglyphs found in Ozark caves, their arrangement was strikingly different. The symbols followed an organizational syntax, more reminiscent of 17th century European mathematics, specifically the notations of early calculus and geometric analysis. This strange fusion of indigenous imagery and European mathematical order led Morrow to propose that the system was neither wholly native nor imported, but something deliberately constructed, a new symbolic language bridging two traditions. Such a project, she argued, would have required both intimate knowledge of Native American symbolic systems and advanced mathematical training, an unusual but not impossible combination for a 19th century physician with unorthodox interests. Could Jeremiah Holloway himself have devised this symbolic system? And if so, to what end? Morrow's analysis hinted at an unsettling possibility. The recursive patterns and nested structures in the markings suggested attempts to describe multidimensional relationships, maps of transformation. In modern mathematical terms, it appeared to be an effort to chart the passage between different states or conditions, a language of change itself.